The arrival in Silver Creek. The first shovelful of sand revealed the curve of a jawbone. The second exposed teeth, still clenched as though in eternal protest. By the time the men cleared the pit, the desert had given up not one body, but nearly 100. Their skeletal remains stacked like cordwood in the limestone earth beneath what had once been the Golden Rose Saloon. The year was 1887, and the discovery was so grotesque, so unimaginable, that 3 officers of the Nevada Territorial Police resigned within a week. They hadn't seen ghosts. They hadn't seen monsters. They had seen what human hands, driven by greed and cruelty, were capable of. For decades, no one spoke of what the newspapers briefly called the Silver Creek Massacre. The files were sealed, the town abandoned, and the land left to rot beneath the desert sun. It was safer to let silence bury the truth, safer to pretend that the ground wasn't hiding a history of unimaginable horror. But history has a way of clawing back to the surface. The story begins long before the bones, before the desert swallowed Silver Creek whole. It begins in the spring of 1870, when 4 sisters stepped off a supply wagon and into the dust-choked main street of a booming mining town. 4 women who looked every inch the image of refinement, but who carried in their trunks the blueprints for one of the most prolific murder enterprises in American frontier history. Silver Creek, a town ripe for predators. Silver Creek wasn't meant to exist. Before Jacob Steinberg stumbled into a cavern streaked with silver ore, the barren hills were nothing but scrubland and rattlesnake country. But by 1870, the place throbbed with life. Ore carts creaked day and night, men shouted down in tunnels half a mile deep. Dynamite blasted rock until the ground itself seemed to groan in protest. The town was a frenzy of greed and sweat. 100 miners working 3 shifts around the clock. 1,000 more hangers-on running saloons, boarding houses, gambling dens, and supply stores. The air was so thick with blasting powder and grit that unusual smells, rot, blood, sickness, barely registered. Men dropped dead in mine shafts, and the ground swallowed them without ceremony. Noise, smoke, and chaos were the natural background of Silver Creek, and in such chaos, secrets could live undisturbed. Law was a day's hard ride away, and morality was even further. If you had money, you had power. If you had women, you had gold. And women were in short supply, so short that one respectable lady on Main Street could cause a brawl in under a minute. For every 30 men, there was barely 1 woman. That imbalance created opportunity. Opportunity the Everhart sisters recognized immediately. The arrival of the 4. The wagon from Carson City rolled into town one May morning, the desert temporarily softened by wildflowers that carpeted the sand in yellow and purple. Perched among barrels and crates sat the Everhart sisters. Greta, Wilhelmina, Margot, and Adelaide. Greta, the eldest at 32, commanded the dusty street with the hauteur of a woman who had no intention of ever bowing to it. She stood nearly a head taller than most men in town, with hair the color of flame and green eyes that fixed on people the way a hawk fixes on a rabbit. She spoke little, but her silence demanded answers. Wilhelmina. Mina, to those who dared familiarity, was quieter. Her pale hair always pinned neatly back, her blue eyes sharp and cold as winter steel. She carried the ledgers, the lists, the arithmetic of their enterprise. If Greta was the general, Mina was the quartermaster. Margot was the warm one, or at least appeared so. Dark hair, hazel eyes, an easy smile that made strangers confess things they hadn't meant to. Her letters and advertisements and tender words written in looping, elegant script would prove to be the bait that drew young women into the Golden Rose's snare. And then Adelaide, the youngest, the softest, the one whose cornflower eyes seemed to promise innocence. She was the velvet glove over the blade, the smile that lowered defenses just before the knife slipped between ribs. Together, they looked like salvation to a town starved of female refinement. To those who knew better, or would come to know too late, they were the 4 horsewomen of Silver Creek's apocalypse. The Golden Rose. They wasted no time. By June, the sisters had rented a failing mercantile building at the end of Main Street. 3 stories of pine and stone, its foundation deeper than most, with a sprawling basement no one asked questions about. They paid a year's rent in advance, a gesture that made the town banker gush about their business acumen. In weeks, the building was reborn as the Golden Rose, part boarding house, part restaurant, part something else no one dared name aloud. Lace curtains from San Francisco hung in the windows. 2 pianos occupied the parlor. Shelves groaned with books, and gas lamps flickered with an almost metropolitan glow. On the surface, it was a beacon of respectability. The wives of foremen gathered there for tea. The school teacher read in its library. Visitors spoke admiringly of its clean linens and fine cooking. But the Golden Rose had 3 faces. The first floor, a respectable boarding house, open to the public. The second floor, a discreet brothel, available only to those who could afford its silk-draped rooms. The third floor, the private quarters, in reality, a holding pen for new arrivals. And beneath it all, in the bowels of the desert, stone, a basement that would come to stink of secrets. Maria Fernandez. The first known disappearance came only 3 months after their arrival. Maria Fernandez, 19 years old, the daughter of a sick mother and an out-of-work father in Carson City. She answered an advertisement placed in the Carson Daily Appeal. Employment for industrious young ladies of good character. Room, board, and fair wages. Respectable establishment. Inquire with Miss M. Everhart, Silver Creek. Maria's letters home began with gratitude. She spoke of clean rooms, fair wages, and the kindness of her new employers. But by September, the letters darkened. She wrote of restrictions on her movements, of being moved from her airy third-floor room into a windowless basement chamber to make space for new boarders, of strange noises at night, muffled voices, metal scraping against stone. Adelaide told her it was only rats. Her final letter, dated September 12th, mentioned 2 other young women housed nearby, though she was forbidden to speak with them. Then, silence. When her father rode to Silver Creek, he was met by Greta herself, who explained in calm, unflinching tones that Maria had left for San Francisco, having secured an extraordinary position with a wealthy family. She produced a farewell note written in Maria's hand, or something very much like it. Her father left uneasy. And Maria Fernandez became the first line in a ledger that would one day list 97 names. A pattern of silence. Charlotte Weber, a German seamstress, followed next. Then a Chinese laundress from Sacramento, then an Irish cook from Denver. Each vanished into the Golden Rose, leaving behind hastily penned letters that excused their absence. By the end of 1872, Silver Creek had grown used to the pattern. Young women arrived, stayed a few weeks, then left suddenly for better opportunities. It was the frontier, after all. People came and went like the wind. And Sheriff Caleb Harrison, a regular patron of the upstairs rooms, saw no reason to investigate. But for every departure, the Golden Rose's cellar grew heavier with secrets. In early 1876, a new arrival stepped off the supply wagon. Rose McGillicuddy, a 26-year-old Irish governess with an education, a sharp tongue, and a family back east who expected regular letters. She was not the kind of victim the Everhart sisters usually selected. She asked too many questions. She noticed too many details. And one night, when the sisters thought her asleep, Rose followed the sound of a door closing down into the cellar beneath the Golden Rose. What she found there would seal her fate and ultimately unravel the Everhart empire. Secrets beneath the Rose McGillicuddy had been in Silver Creek less than a month when she began to suspect that the Golden Rose was not a house of refinement, but of rot. At first, it was the small things. Too many locked doors. Too many trunks, arriving but never leaving. Perfume masking something metallic beneath. The other women who appeared at supper one evening and were gone the next, their absence explained away with stories too neat, too convenient. But it was the basement noises that truly unsettled her. She had grown up in Boston, in a row house that creaked and groaned with every passing wagon. She knew the ordinary sighs of wood and stone. What she heard in the Golden Rose were not sighs. They were muffled thuds, dragging sounds, sometimes a faint cry cut short. And always after midnight. Curiosity is dangerous. But for Rose, curiosity had always been survival. The locked door. The door stood half hidden behind a cabinet of linens near the staircase landing. Rose had noticed Dr. Elias Hoffman slip through it one night, his medical bag clutched in one hand, a bundle of something wrapped in canvas in the other. When she asked the next morning about his visits, Wilhelmina Everhart had smiled thinly and muttered something about private patients. It wasn't enough. Rose wanted proof. On a Sunday, when the sisters left for a luncheon with Silver Creek's banker, Rose crept down the stairwell. She pushed the cabinet aside with trembling fingers. The door was locked, but Rose was not unprepared. Governesses learned more than etiquette in the households of wealthy families. She'd once watched a footman in Sacramento jimmy a lock with a bent hairpin. It took her less than a minute to hear the tumblers click. The door groaned open. A wave of air rolled out, stale, metallic, carrying with it the faint stench of something long dead. Rose clutched her kerchief to her nose and stepped inside. The catacombs, the basement, was no simple cellar. The sisters had carved it deeper and wider, stone walls reinforced with timber beams, corridors snaking into the earth. The farther Rose descended, the colder the air became. Though sweat still dampened her back from fear. Her lantern caught glimpses. Chains bolted to stone walls. Wooden partitions forming narrow stalls. A drain cut into the floor, stained with something black. She nearly turned back then, heart hammering. But a glint stopped her. On a shelf, carefully arranged, sat a row of trinkets. A silver locket, a pair of ivory-handled scissors, a rosary with beads worn smooth by prayer. She touched the locket, opened it, and saw the faces of two children staring back. Someone's mother, someone's sister, someone who had not left for Denver, as the Everharts claimed. And in that moment, Rose understood. The Golden Rose was a charnel house. Ledgers of death. In a desk shoved against the far wall, she found the records. Wilhelmina's neat, unforgiving script filled page after page. Each entry listed the woman's name, age, skills, value of belongings, date of departure. But Rose knew what departure meant now. 97 names marched across those pages, each reduced to a line of profit and loss. She felt bile rise in her throat. To the Everharts, life was a column in an account book. Murder was not passion. It was business. The footsteps, a sound, froze her. The creak of a door above. Footsteps on the stair. Slow, deliberate. Not one set. Two. The sisters were back. Earlier than expected. Rose doused her lantern and pressed herself against the stone wall, the darkness swallowing her. She heard their voices echo down the corridor. Greta's low and commanding. Adelaide's lighter, more hesitant. "Leave it," Greta said. "She suspects nothing." "She watches too closely," Adelaide whispered. "I see it in her eyes." The footsteps came closer. Rose's pulse roared in her ears. If they turned the corner, they would see her. And she knew what that meant. Her hand brushed against the locket in her pocket. She gripped it like a talisman and prayed. Not for salvation, but for time. Rose's escape. When the footsteps faded back toward the stairwell, Rose bolted. She retraced her path, heart pounding, every shadow a threat. At the top, she slipped through the linen cabinet just as the sisters' laughter drifted from the parlor. She locked the door behind her, slid the cabinet back into place, and forced herself to walk, not run, to her room. There, in the dark, she wrote. She described everything she had seen in a letter to her sister Margaret in Boston. She could not risk posting it from Silver Creek, where Heinrich Miller, the storekeeper, might betray her to the sisters. She would carry it with her, find a safer post on the road. But letters alone would not save her. The Everharts were predators. Predators noticed when their prey grew restless. Rose would need to play a role until she could flee. The mask of innocence. Next morning, Rose appeared at breakfast as though nothing had changed. She smiled at Adelaide's chatter, complimented Greta's new lace collar, even asked Wilhelmina for sewing tips. She laughed at Margot's jokes, her voice steady though her insides quaked. But she watched, and she learned. She saw how Greta controlled the men in town with money and secrets, how Wilhelmina kept ledgers not only of victims but of bribes paid to Sheriff Harrison, how Margot drafted new advertisements for young ladies of good character, each tailored to lure the desperate, how Adelaide, beneath her pretty mask, carried a cruelty that chilled Rose's bones. Each sister played a part, and together they formed an unbreakable chain. Unless someone broke it. The fateful decision by March 1876, Rose had made up her mind. She would leave Silver Creek. But departure had to look natural, believable. If she fled outright, they would follow. If she pretended to leave for family reasons, they might let her go. So she crafted her story. Her grandmother in Boston had fallen gravely ill. She showed the sisters a forged telegram, written in her own hand, begging her return. She wept, convincingly. She thanked them for their kindness. But Greta's green eyes studied her too long. "You'll be back," Greta said, her voice low, her smile too sharp. Silver Creek has a way of calling its daughters home. On the night before her departure, Rose slipped the locket, the ivory scissors, and a copy of Wilhelmina's ledger page into the lining of her dress. Proof of what she had seen. Proof that might save the lives of others. But as she packed her bag, she noticed something chilling. Her door, which she always locked at night, was ajar. And from the dark hallway came the unmistakable sound of someone breathing. The house watches. The breathing outside Rose's door was not imagined. She sat frozen, her hands gripping the fabric of her skirt until her knuckles blanched, every nerve straining to separate hallway silence from the hammer of her own heart. A floorboard groaned. Then another. The door eased inward just an inch, enough for a sliver of lamplight to cut through the darkness. Rose's mind screamed to bolt it shut, to cry out, to fling the lamp at whoever stood there. But she forced herself to remain still. Predators struck when prey panicked. The breath retreated, the door clicked closed. She did not sleep at all that night. Breakfast with wolves. Morning sunlight fell golden through lace curtains, yet the parlor felt colder than a grave. Greta poured coffee with her usual elegance, but her gaze lingered on Rose too long. Margot hummed tunelessly as she spread butter on bread. Wilhelmina scribbled in a notebook, and Adelaide, smiling prettily, toyed with a hairpin, the very tool Rose had used to pick the basement lock. Rose smiled back, her face a mask. She sipped coffee, though her stomach roiled. Every casual glance from the sisters seemed sharpened, deliberate, as though testing how long she could pretend. "They say your grandmother is quite ill?" Greta said at last, her tone conversational but her eyes cutting. Rose's hand trembled slightly on her cup. "Yes, a telegram arrived. I leave tomorrow." Greta's lips curved, but there was no warmth in it. Families are such fragile things, aren't they? One absence, and the whole house collapses. Silver Creek whispers. Rose spent her final day weaving lies like a spider spins silk. She told Heinrich Müller she would return to Boston for a few months, asked him to send word east if her family inquired. She visited the schoolteacher, Miss Peaton, leaving behind a cheerful farewell that seemed ordinary enough. But whispers followed her. Men in the saloon muttered she was too clever for her own good. Women she barely knew offered blessings with eyes full of unease. It was as if Silver Creek itself had turned into a stage, and every inhabitant played a part in the sisters. Script. Rose realized then, the Golden Rose wasn't just a house, it was a web, and Greta sat at its center. The doctor's visit. That evening, Dr. Hoffman arrived with his black bag, his stooped frame hunched against the desert wind. Rose had never spoken directly to him before, but when she passed him in the hallway, his eyes met hers, watery, pale, and knowing. "You're leaving," he murmured. Not a question. A diagnosis. "Yes," she said. He leaned close enough that she caught the bitter tang of opium on his breath. "Not all who leave Arrive. Then he shuffled down the hall toward the basement door. Rose felt the chill of those words settle into her bones. A dance of politeness. That night, the sisters hosted a supper in Rose's honor. A farewell, they called it. Candles glowed, violins. Played from a phonograph, wine flowed freely. Adelaide toasted to Rose's journey home, her smile angelic. Margot recited a sentimental poem about partings. Greta clasped Rose's hand and whispered, "Silver Creek will miss you." Yet beneath the warmth lay menace. Greta's grip was iron. Adelaide's eyes glittered like a cat's watching a bird flutter too near. Even Wilhelmina, usually stoic, allowed herself a thin smile when Rose nearly choked on her wine. Every bite of food felt poisoned. Every toast sounded like a funeral prayer. The midnight knock later, as Rose packed her trunk once more, a knock came at her door. "Miss McGillicuddy?" Adelaide's voice soft, almost childlike. "May I come in?" Rose hesitated, then forced herself to answer. "Of course." Adelaide entered, carrying a folded shawl. She draped it across Rose's bed, her movements graceful, her smile practiced. "A gift," she said, "for the cold roads east." Rose's thanks caught in her throat. She unfolded the shawl. Between the fabric folds, something small tumbled out. A rosary, its silver crucifix bent, beads broken as if from a struggle. Rose froze. Adelaide only smiled wider. "Strange, isn't it, the things that turn up in laundry?" she whispered. Then she slipped out, closing the door behind her. Rose sat alone, the rosary gleaming on her bedspread. Her plan to leave in the morning suddenly felt like a death sentence. The sisters knew. They had always known. And, as the night deepened, Rose heard footsteps again in the hall, but this time they did not retreat. They stopped directly outside her door. The handle turned. Asterisk. The noose tightens, the handle rattled. Rose leapt forward, pressing her weight against the door. Whoever stood outside tried once, twice, and then silence. The absence was worse than the attempt itself. She could feel the presence on the other side, listening. Only when the hall clock struck midnight did the pressure lift. But the sisters knew. She had no more time. A town that looked away. Morning dawned, red as a wound on the desert horizon. Rose left her room with her travel trunk, determined to walk straight to Heinrich Müller's store and arrange passage out of Silver Creek. Yet everywhere she turned, eyes followed. The seamstress on the corner stopped her stitching to watch. Miners leaning on railings paused mid-spit. Even children playing in the dust seemed suddenly still. It struck her with sick clarity. The town was not blind. It was complicit. The golden. Rose lined too many pockets, supplied too much silence. When she reached the general store, Heinrich shook his head before she spoke a word. "Coach is full," he muttered. "No space till next week." She stared at him. "You arranged it for me yesterday." His hands shook as he stacked flour sacks. "Things change. Best stay put, Miss McGillicuddy." Behind him, Greta's reflection appeared in the shop's window. She smiled at Rose with polite cruelty, as though this entire exchange were another carefully choreographed scene. The sisters' gifts. That evening, Adelaide left another gift at Rose's door. A velvet, ribbon stained with what looked like rust. Only Rose knew better. Margot followed the next morning with a poem slipped under her plate at breakfast. Written in her graceful hand, it read, "The bird who sings of freedom bright should guard her throat when falls the night." Rose crumpled the paper, but Greta plucked it from her fist with a cold laugh. "Keep it," she advised. "Mementos are so precious." The trap. Beneath Rose's last hope was the basement. Not to investigate further, but to find another way out. She had seen passages, tunnels carved deep into the earth. Perhaps one led to the open desert. She waited until the house slept. Lamp in hand, she slipped through the concealed door, descending into air that smelled of lime and iron. But the golden rose breathed like a living thing. Every tunnel seemed to bend back on itself. Corridors ended in walls slick with moisture. Chains clinked in empty rooms, though no one was there. She felt watched, though she saw no figure. At last she found a passage that sloped downward, rough, earth beneath her palms, air colder than night. She followed it until she saw daylight. A jagged crack in the rocks ahead. She ran. And then a voice floated after her, soft and lilting. "Leaving without saying goodbye, Miss McGillicuddy?" Margot stepped from the shadows, lantern raised, her hazel eyes glowing with triumph. Behind, her footsteps multiplied. The sisters had been waiting. The circle closes. They herded Rose back into the basement chambers, though they never touched her. Their words and presence were iron enough. Greta gestured toward a chair bolted to the floor, its surface stained dark. "Sit," she ordered. Rose refused, clinging to the last shred of dignity. Her voice shook, but carried. "You'll be found out. I've told people. My family will—" Greta interrupted with a laugh. "Your family will receive a letter, in your hand, explaining how you ran off with a gambler bound for Denver. Tragic, isn't it? But believable." Wilhelmina produced one of Rose's letters home, her handwriting perfectly mimicked. She placed it on the table like evidence in a trial already won. A desperate bargain. Rose searched their faces, desperate for a crack in their armor. Adelaide, the youngest, wouldn't meet her eyes. For the briefest moment, Rose saw something. Fear, regret. A trembling lip that betrayed humanity under layers of painted cruelty. Rose seized it. "Adelaide," she whispered. "You don't have to do this. You can let me go. Help me and we'll both be free." Adelaide's lashes fluttered. For one heartbeat, silence stretched. Then Greta's hand clamped on her sister's shoulder. The moment was gone. Greta leaned close to Rose, her green eyes gleaming. "You see, dear, the house itself doesn't let anyone go." Chains rattled in the dark. Doors slammed overhead. The tunnels seemed to groan, alive with the weight of every vanished woman. Rose realized then that escape would not come from running. It would require something far more dangerous. And as the sisters closed in, lantern light glinting on cold iron, she made her decision. If the golden rose was to keep her, it would bleed for it. The house turns on them. The lamp went out. 1 second, Rose was glaring into Greta's cruel green eyes, and the next, darkness swallowed everything. Someone had blown the flame. The basement exhaled like a living beast. Chains swung. The stench of lime and blood thickened. And in the pitch black, Rose heard something she had never expected. The sisters whispering to each other, voices quick, strained, afraid. For the first time, the Everhart women did not sound like predators. They sounded like prey. A fracture in the four rows stayed very still, letting her ears drink in their panic. "Light it again," Greta snapped. "Now!" "It wasn't me," Adelaide hissed. "Then who?" Wilhelmina's voice wavered. "The draft couldn't—" Margot shushed them with urgency. "She's listening." Rose smiled in the dark. Yes, she was. When Greta's lantern sputtered back to life, she caught Adelaide's trembling hands, clutching a rosary so tightly the beads cut her skin. For weeks, Rose had seen the youngest bend beneath Greta's will. But now, cracks. The dead-bearing witness. The sisters tried to reassert control, circling Rose in the chamber. But the golden rose betrayed them. From somewhere deeper in the tunnels came a sound. Not footsteps, not chains, but voices. Dozens of women murmuring at once. The echoes rose and fell, a chorus of grief that shook the walls. Adelaide gasped and dropped her rosary. Margot pressed both hands to her ears. "Enough," Greta barked, though her voice quavered. "They're gone. We buried them." But the walls seemed to disagree. The whispers carried names. Maria, Charlotte, Elise, Ruth. Rose spoke above the cacophony. "You hear them, don't you? They don't rest. Not for you. Not for this house." Her words hit like flint on tinder. Adelaide's eyes welled with tears. Even Wilhelmina's lips thinned in doubt. Turning the knife, Rose leaned forward, speaking softly as though confiding. You think she'll protect you? Her gaze locked on Adelaide. Greta would kill you in a heartbeat if it meant the others. Stayed in line. Haven't you felt it? The weight of her hand on your shoulder? The way she decides what you are? Adelaide's breath hitched. Greta's face hardened, but the seed was planted. Rose turned to Wilhelmina. And you. Always. Keeping the ledgers, the lists, the blood turned into numbers. Who do you think they'll blame when it all falls? You. The bookkeeper. The proof. Wilhelmina's eyes flicked with unease. Now to Margot. Your charm is wasted, Margot. You make promises you can't keep. I've seen your lies falter. What happens when your tongue slips and Greta decides you're no longer useful? Margot glared at her, but the twitch in her cheek betrayed the truth. She had thought it herself. The circle around Rose had stopped closing in. The sisters had turned, just slightly, toward one another. The first blow had happened faster than Rose could have planned. Greta shoved Adelaide for her trembling, calling her weak. Adelaide, sobbing, slapped her back. Don't you dare call me weak, she screamed. You've chained us just like them. Wilhelmina tried to separate them, but Margot pushed her, instead accusing her of keeping secrets in her ledgers. The basement, once their throne room, had become a pit fight. Rose backed slowly toward the tunnel, her heart a war drum in her chest. But the sisters' voices still rose around her. Fury, betrayal, confessions. You said we'd be safe. You said no one would ever find out. You've doomed us, Greta. For the first time, the Everhart sisters were not predators. They were four-cornered animals, teeth bared at each other. The house groans above. The building shuddered as if reacting to their violence. Dust rained from the beams. Somewhere a door slammed, though no one had touched it. The golden rose had feasted too long on suffering. Now it seemed to hunger for theirs. Rose ducked into the tunnel, but Greta saw her. Blood trickled from a cut on Greta's lip where Adelaide had struck her, but her eyes still burned. You won't leave, she hissed. None of us will. She lunged after Rose, the others screaming behind her. Rose ran through the twisting tunnels, lantern swinging wildly. Behind her came the sisters' footsteps, their curses, their breaking unity. And ahead, daylight. Or was it firelight? She couldn't tell. The exit flickered like a mirage, beckoning her closer. But as she neared, she heard another voice waiting. In the dark, not the sisters, not the dead, something else. Rose. It whispered. We've been waiting. The last bloom. The whisper in the dark was not the sisters. It was softer, older. A chorus braided into one voice. Rose. You saw. You know. You mustn't leave us here. The lantern flame guttered, and for a breathless instant, Rose felt the desert air pressing through cracks in the earth. Dry, cold, like skeletal fingers, brushing her skin. Behind her, the sisters shrieked and clawed at each other, their pact dissolving into violence. But ahead, the tunnel widened toward a trembling light. Rose ran. Ashes and blood. The chamber she stumbled into was unlike the others. No chains. No ledgers. Just walls blackened by fire, as though the room itself had once tried to burn its sins. Away. And in the center, a pit. Charred bones lay within, hundreds of them fused together in grotesque knots. Some still wore bracelets, rosaries, rings. Their hollow sockets seemed to watch her. The whispers grew louder, echoing against the stone. Not sorrow now, but demand. Take us, tell them. We cannot rest in silence. Rose fell to her knees, trembling. Her rational mind screamed hallucination, shock, fear. But her heart knew better. This was the graveyard truth of the Everharts. Sisters. In ruin, Greta burst into the chamber, face streaked with blood and fury. Behind her, Adelaide staggered, clutching her arm where Margot's knife had slashed her. Wilhelmina's hair was torn, her ledger clutched against her chest like scripture. They were no longer united. They were carrion birds pecking each other. Raw. Greta raised a shard of broken wood like a spear. This ends with her. The house can't breathe if she walks free. But before she could strike, the ground trembled. The pit exhaled a blast of fetid air, and the golden rose groaned above them like a collapsing cathedral. Margot screamed. Adelaide fled. Wilhelmina shrieked that the ledgers must be saved. And Greta plunged forward, straight at Rose. Fire in the rose. The house chose its moment. A beam cracked. Sparks rained. The tunnels lit like a funeral pyre as the golden rose above them caught fire, greedily feeding on its own history. Rose scrambled backward, choking on smoke. Greta lunged through the haze, but a collapse of stone crushed her arm, pinning her at the edge of the pit. Her green eyes blazed. "Help me," she snarled, "or you'll be no better than us." Rose stared down at her, torn between the instinct to run and the truth burning in her chest. Greta was right. Letting her die here in the dark was the same pit the sisters had fallen into. The pit where life and humanity were traded for convenience. The pit hissed. The voices rose. "Choose." A bargain with the dead rose dropped to her, knees prying at the stones with bleeding hands. Greta screamed in agony, but she budged free. Not from mercy. Not entirely. Rose wanted Greta to face the world alive, branded by her crimes. But the golden rose had other plans. A final collapse split the chamber. Greta tumbled, screaming, into the pit of bones. Her cry was swallowed by the whispers as the fire surged. Wilhelmina tried to drag the ledgers through the smoke, but the flames ate the paper from her arms, curling the records into ash before her eyes. She wailed as though her soul had burned with them. Adelaide clawed toward the exit, coughing, only to vanish beneath a falling beam. Margot, her silk dress aflame, fled into the tunnel, shrieking until the sound cut off. And then there was silence. The last witness, Rose, staggered into the dawn. The golden rose blazed behind her, smoke clawing the Nevada sky. From the distance, the town stirred, miners rushing with buckets, wives screaming, children crying. But it was too late. The house was collapsing into itself, burying its secrets in fire and rubble. Except Rose. She carried them. The whispers trailed her into daylight. Tell them. Tell them all. But when she opened her mouth to speak, nothing came out. Her throat was raw, not just from smoke, from the weight of what she'd seen. And in that silence, she realized truth itself was a curse. The rose still blooms months. Later, in Carson City, the story spread like wildfire. Some said the Everhart sisters perished in the flames. Others whispered Greta escaped into the desert, one-armed and vowing revenge. Rose testified before officials, but when pressed about the whispers, the pit, the fire, her voice faltered. She could not make them believe. The ledgers were gone. The house reduced to ash. Without proof, her words were treated as hysteria. The Everhart name became legend, half believed, a cautionary tale. And then, a year later, a letter arrived in Denver. Handwritten, elegant, promising, respectable work for young women of good character. Signed in a neat, familiar script, M. Everhart. The golden rose had burned. But the seeds, they had scattered.